Now that America has decided to declare war and jump in on the side of the Allied powers with Britain, France, and Russia, they've got to get mobilized for war. And this is going to require quite a bit. One of the things you have to see is a transformation of factories. What you see right here is a factory that's making airplane chassis, the bodies of airplanes. And what you would do is you wouldn't start a brand new factory. You take factory structures that are already existing and you ask companies to go ahead and make war making materials for you. And for any business, this was going to be a huge increase in their revenue. So if you got a government contract to produce something, think of something simple just like uniforms. If you had a textile industry where you're making bolts of cloth, or let's say you do specifically clothing, and you make uniforms, and the United States Army says, we're going to need 500,000 new uniforms. That's a lot of work for you. So you're really pleased to get that. And you don't mind changing up what you do in your business model just a little bit because it's not going to be hard to adjust. Maybe you make automobile engines, and the military comes to you and says, we need you to set aside some of your factory resources so that you can build airplane engines. That's what we need. And so you're more than happy to get that contract. So the government needs to get their private businesses on board as well, and they offer them generous amounts of money to do so. One of the big problems or critiques of the war is that people were profiting off of death. And that's true to an extent. War usually offers you some serious business contracts. What you're seeing in this next picture are artillery shells, small artillery shells that are being manufactured. Armaments require a lot of work. You're going to use a lot of bullets and a lot of bombs in a war. And so ultimately, this will be a huge increase in that particular field of industry. And so you think about any war making materials, think about even food, just feeding an army, clothing an army. Everybody gets a rifle, everybody gets a knife, a sidearm pistol. You're going to need lots of ammunition, you're going to need training. So mobilizing and getting your factories on board are going to be very important. Now, something else you see with this particular picture, in this factory, you see women working. For the United States in particular, while men are off fighting in the war, women are going to get an interesting experience back at home. They start working in factories and taking on jobs that were traditionally done by men. And so this gives them a sense of freedom that they can earn money on their own, that they have independence, that they're able to do jobs that society never thought they could do. So part of mobilizing for war means getting your people ready, getting your resources together, and even food. When it comes to feeding the army, one of the things they would encourage citizens to do was grow victory gardens. They're like, hey, we got to make sure that the troops have enough to eat, so grow your fruits and vegetables in your own backyard. And that way, stuff grown on giant commercial farms can go overseas to the troops. Now, also part of mobilizing for war meant having to pay for the war. And you're going to devote a lot of your tax dollars to war, but the United States would also sell war bonds to citizens and companies or anybody else willing to buy them. A war bond is where you would agree to give a certain amount of money to the government, and they would pay you back plus interest after the war was over, and you'd be able to redeem that certificate like the one you see here. And so the United States said, we need people. We need people on board with this, and we need the money to do it. And people saw it as kind of an act of patriotism that you could buy your war bonds. And so there were posters up everywhere encouraging people, hey, you need to help pay for the war. Maybe you can't be over there, but you can contribute and you can participate in a particular capacity. So war bonds are going to become an important source for funding this war too. Okay? Something else you're going to need, propaganda. The United States realized that propaganda is going to be crucial in order to get support for the war. They realized that this war is not going to go quickly. They realized that reports of people dying and being injured are going to come back, including people who will ultimately die and their bodies will be returned. So the United States is going to enlist certain people to engage in propaganda. And for our purposes, propaganda is distributing ideas, information, or rumors to help or hurt a particular cause. Now, the way that the United States wanted to get support for the war is using propaganda, and it doesn't always matter if it's true. One way in which they would use propaganda is through what they called 4-minute men. And you can see an example in this particular picture. These are volunteers who would go around and give a speech about why you should support the war, and they were supposed to do it. They were supposed to do it in 4 minutes or less. And you can see this guy's drawing a big crowd. He's got like a little megaphone, and they have rehearsed speeches, and the likes of one that you can see here. You can see the very opening lines. The man says, "I've just received information there's a German spy among us." Well, they're not really talking about a German spy being there, but they have to frighten people a little bit. Sometimes you might have to lie in order to get people a little bit excited. Okay, and listen, they tell you things that you would want to hear, and they're saying that spy is going to report back on what we're doing. We want to let everybody know that Americans are more likely to contribute to this war, and there's no hope for them because we're going to contribute a lot of money. And notice they give you little clues to things that Americans would know about. If you look at the last two or three little stanzas there, it says, "I hope these spies are getting their messages straight for the treachery here, attempted treachery in Mexico." They're referencing things like the Zimmerman note, things that people would get angry about. And listen, they're saying that if you don't do something, these Germans will want to, they're going to want to murder Americans, more and more of them. So you've got to do something. That's part of propaganda. Now, the propaganda can be so effective at times that Americans get a little crazy. What you see here is a farmer in Minnesota who might have questioned a few things, and word got around that perhaps he didn't contribute as much to buying war bonds, and so local people tarred and feathered this man. If you don't know tar and feathering, back in the Revolutionary War era, people would take boiling hot oil, pour it on somebody, and then dump feathers on them. So this man was tarred and feathered. And listen, the people responsible for doing it, they're not found guilty when they're put on trial for this. People didn't have a lot of sympathy for this guy, this poor man. Okay. Propaganda also takes the form of various posters, and I'll show you a couple of those as well. This is a really good one because you see right here the catchphrase, "Halt the Hun." Hun, a derogatory name for Germans. And you see a soldier there stepping in and stopping a German soldier from doing God knows what to a woman and a child. And they're implying that he's going to assault her in ways that you don't really want to talk about. Now, notice too, the American soldier is not carrying a gun, he's got a sword. And the sword's meant to depict, in some capacity, all about chivalry, and that Americans are going to stand up and do the right thing and step in and save people because it's the right thing to do. All right. You also notice the level, that this American soldier is standing higher above the German soldier, and you see the way that his face is drawn. He's kind of got like a square jaw, very stout-looking individual. Okay. Join the Army American Eagle or Army Air Service. Be an American Eagle. You see the bald eagle here. And notice each one of these are asking you specific things to do. This is how propaganda works. Now, there are other propaganda pieces you can look through on your own, but one of the other crucial things about propaganda is it doesn't always have to be true to be effective. And one other thing about mobilizing for war that was going to be super helpful as well, the United States is going to implement a draft, a military draft. They're going to draft individuals, they're going to train them and send them over to Europe to fight. So mobilizing for war is important. You got to have your factories on board, you have to have people supporting the war, and you've got to convince them that it's a good thing.